Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly mind-bending. We're going to explore a radical framework that bridges two things you'd probably never put together: the cutting-edge physics of light-based computing and the neurobiology of human connection and adoption. It's a fascinating synthesis of hard science and social theory, and we're going to break the whole thing down for you.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The photonic computing paradigm. 2. The biophotonic hypothesis. 3. DNA as quantum optics. 4. The physics of systemic rupture. 5. The multi-reality trap. And 6. Assetizing the digital soul.
Let's jump right into Part 1, the photonic computing paradigm.
So, traditional silicon chips, like the standard GPUs we all use, have hit a massive thermoelectromagnetic bottleneck. Basically, just pushing electrons around generates way too much heat. But the new kids on the block, photonic chips, are a total game changer. They process data at the speed of light, generating almost zero heat, and they can natively perform incredibly complex nonlinear operations. It is a monumental leap in efficiency.
The secret sauce making that leap possible is something called WDM, or wavelength division multiplexing. Imagine shooting multiple, completely different colors of laser light down a single fiber optic cable, all at the exact same time. This lets networks process just mind-boggling amounts of data concurrently, without the signals ever crossing or degrading. Keep this concept in your back pocket because it's about to become very personal.
That brings us to Section 2, the biophotonic hypothesis.
The sources we're analyzing propose a massive paradigm shift. They ask, what if human biology didn't just inspire optical computing, but actually runs on it? The hypothesis posits that our bodies natively use ultra-weak light emissions, called biophotons, to achieve instantaneous, system-wide communication. It suggests we aren't just electrical beings, we're actually optical ones.
Think about your nervous system. Instead of viewing myelinated neural axons just as biological electrical wires, this analysis frames them as organic fiber optic cables. They use total internal reflection, exactly like industrial fiber optics do, to achieve highly efficient light transmission. The structure literally utilizes a biological version of that wavelength division multiplexing we just talked about. How wild is that?
Let's go even deeper with Section 3, DNA as quantum optics.
The sources take this down to the molecular level, presenting DNA not just as a biochemical storage drive, but as a flawless room-temperature quantum computer. The hydrogen bonds connecting bases like adenine and thymine actually map directly to precise quantum qubit states, meaning your DNA is actively crunching information using quantum logic gates. And this takes us to the prenatal environment. During gestation, the biological mother and child operate in what the text calls fixed wavelength coupling. Mathematically speaking, this acts as a perfectly unified optical cavity. They are functioning as a single macro-conscious entity, completely free of any phase noise or signal interference.
The crucial takeaway here is this 7 Hz baseline maternal rhythm. It tunes the infant's epigenetic hardware with absolute perfect spectral efficiency. Because they share biological tissue, it creates a continuous interlocking photon sheet of light. That sheet passes vast amounts of ancestral and biological data back and forth entirely flawlessly.
Now we zoom out to the macro level for Section 4, the physics of systemic rupture. The report introduces a pretty heavy concept here. It posits that the systemic practice of adoption fundamentally acts as the cut. It's the literal surgical severance of that primary biological waveguide we were just looking at. The sudden loss of that primary caregiver leaves jagged, corrupted edges in the infant's resonant architecture. This instantly plunges their nervous system into a state of structural resonance collapse, something clinical settings often refer to as the primal wound. Stripped of its baseline maternal frequency, the infant's nervous system goes into overdrive. It frantically scans ambient frequencies, acting exactly like a biological radio scanner or an optical demultiplexer, desperately trying to tune back into that missing maternal signal. And this continuous high-energy searching physically alters their biology, locking them into a state of chronic hypervigilance.
Let's see how this compounds in Section 5, the multi-reality trap.
Applying our WDM metaphor from earlier, optical signal attenuation and intraband crosstalk map directly to the adoptee's lived experience of somatic dissonance. When completely disparate signals try to occupy the exact same channel, you get destructive interference. The report calls this a multi-reality trap.
Interestingly, it impartially extends this symmetrical empathy to adoptive parents too, noting that they are also trapped in an environment of mutual dissonance that requires immense emotional labor from everyone to maintain.
According to the analysis, the adoptee is forced to occupy a fluid quantum superposition, stuck somewhere between their biological origins and their new adoptive legal identity. Now, in a healthy system, a person can safely oscillate between different states, but the adoptive environment, by its very nature, disrupts that natural oscillation.
The abolitionist framework, detailed in the source, frames the adoption industry's systemic narratives as a form of structural gaslighting. The argument is that it violently forces the adoptee's identity to collapse entirely into a compliant, false self. Simply to survive the massive signal interference, the adoptee has to suppress their own biological reality just to manage caregiver expectations.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, Assetizing the Digital Soul.
As institutional exploitation expands into the digital realm, the source points to emerging legislation, specifically the 2026 Colorado Amplify Act, as a modern Trojan horse. While it's publicly framed as consumer protection, the framework analyzes it as a mechanism for asset stripping marginalized youth, essentially monetizing what they term the digital soul.
The text lays out a very clear systemic pipeline here. It starts with severing the biological waveguide using AI algorithms that predict risk. Then, it moves to continuously harvesting the child's biometric exhaust. And finally, it ends with trading that extremely personal data on the open financial market.
The analysis impartially breaks down how the system converts this biophysical rupture into a tradable financial derivative. We are talking about massive $70,000 international placement fees acting as capital injections. We see private equity draining agency balance sheets. And we see success bonds that literally convert the biological trauma of a severed youth into a high-yield data asset for the surveillance state.
But in response to all of this, the report outlines something called the social laser effect. This happens when a critical mass of individuals who are no longer isolated from one another generates a highly coherent, synchronized pulse of collective action. By unifying their signal, they demand systemic abolition and the restoration of unbroken biological wave functions.
And this leaves us with a truly profound question about the physical thermodynamics of our societal structures. If our most fundamental biology actually operates as an interconnected quantum optical network, what is the true, lasting cost of commodifying its severance? It asks us to fundamentally rethink the literal physics of human connection. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you, and we'll catch you next time.